Chapter 12. "We'll have to do this on the honor system," Mr. Adams said, winking at Corky as he handed her the exam. Seated on a tall metal stool, Corky leaned forward over the lab table and took the exam from the teacher. "What do you mean?" she asked, studying his face. Mr. Adams was young, in his mid-20s, but his dark brown hair was already graying at the sides, and his mustache, which rested over his top lip, like one of the bushy caterpillars they had studied in biology, was also sprinkled with gray. He had friendly brown eyes, a nice smile, and usually dressed in jeans and oversized sweaters. He was a tough teacher, demanding, but well-liked. "I have to go pick up my car at the service garage," he told her. "I should be back in 20 minutes, half an hour at the most." He lifted his down jacket off a chair. Corky glanced quickly at the test. 6 essay questions, no real surprises. "I'll try not to cheat too much while you're gone," she joked. Mr. Adams chuckled. He pulled the bulky jacket on over his sweater. "Those frogs are noisy, aren't they?" he asked, pointing to the big frog case on the shelf against the wall. 6 or 8 frogs were croaking throatily. "Whoever told them they could sing?" "They'll keep me company," Corky replied, watching the creatures hopping around behind the glass. "How long do I have for the exam?" "It shouldn't take more than an hour," he said. "It's way too easy." "Yeah, right," she said, laughing. He gave her a quick wave, pointed to the paper as if to say, "Get to work," and hurried out of the lab. The room grew silent, except for the rhythmic croaking of the frogs. Corky turned her eyes to the windows that ran along the wall to her right. Shards of December sunlight slanted into the room through the Venetian blinds, falling onto the large tropical fish tank in the corner. Beside it stood a human skeleton, hunched on its stand, its shoulders slumped forward, its knees bent, as if it were weary. Shelves beside the skeleton held large specimen jars filled with insects, plant specimens, and all kinds of animal parts. Corky made a disgusted face, remembering the cow eyeball Mr. Adams had shown them earlier that afternoon. It was so enormous, so blobby. She glanced up at the clock, a little past 3:30. Cheerleading practice would be starting in the gym. She tapped her pencil rapidly on the tabletop, thinking about her long conversation with Kimmy the night before. Then, scolding herself for wasting time, she lowered her eyes to the exam and read the first question. "Good," she said out loud, seeing that it was about osmosis. She had studied osmosis well. She knew everything there was to know about it. She scooted the stool closer to the counter. Then she wrote the number 1 at the top of the page. "Hey!" she cried out, startled, as the door to the room slammed shut. Had Mr. Adams returned already? She spun around to see. No one there. Someone out in the corridor must have closed it. She glanced up at the clock. 3:35. "I'm wasting time," she said, and began to write. The singing of the frogs seemed to grow louder. Glancing up with a sigh, Corky saw that the frogs were all hopping around wildly in their glass case, splashing against each other, grappling onto one another's backs. "Thanks for the help, guys," she said dryly, rolling her eyes. "What's your problem, anyway?" She returned her attention to the test paper. Then the Venetian blinds all slammed shut at once. The clatter made Corky drop her pencil. It fell to the floor and rolled under the table. "Hey!" The room was much darker without the sunlight. Corky slid off the stool and dropped to her knees to retrieve her pencil. When she stood up, the overhead lights flickered off. "What?" Corky blinked. Total darkness now. The frogs sang louder. Corky covered her ears with her hands. "What's going on? Is someone here?" The singing of the frogs was the only reply. She stood uncertain, leaning against the tall lab table. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light. "Is there a blackout?" she wondered out loud. Then she heard an unfamiliar pop, pop, pop. It took her a while to realize it was the sound of the glass lids popping off the specimen jars. She saw the lids fly up to the ceiling, then crash back to the floor, the glass shattering, flying across the floor. The contents of the jars floated up. Hundreds of dead flies rose up from one jar and darkened the air. Dozens of caterpillars followed them, floating silently in formation like a flock of birds. The croaking became deafening. As she stared in disbelief, Corky realized that the frogs were free. Their glass case had also shattered. About 24 of them were leaping over the countertops, scrabbling toward her. "Help!" Corky managed to yell. She gasped as something large and soft plopped onto the counter in front of her, splashed her, spread stickily over her test paper. The cow eyeball. It stared up at her as if watching her. The frogs were on her countertop too, leaping over one another, climbing onto the disgusting eyeball, crying out their excitement. The Venetian blinds began to clatter noisily, open, shut, flying out into the room as if blown by the wind even though all the windows were closed. Sunlight flashed on and off, as fast as Corky could blink. I have to get out of here, she told herself. She brushed a croaking frog off her shoulder. Another one leapt at her face. The cow eyeball rose up, plopped down again, then rose up as if trying to fly. With a disgusted cry, Corky ducked as the wet eyeball flew at her face. It floated over her head. She could feel it spray her hair. Then she heard it land with a sickening plop on the floor. She had started running to the door when something at the front of the room caught her eye. The skeleton. It was no longer hunched over. It was standing straight, straining to free itself from its pedestal. Corky grabbed the doorknob and pulled. The door wouldn't budge. "Help!" She gasped as the room filled with a sour odor that invaded her nostrils, choked her throat. So sour. Sour as death. She tried the door again. "Help me! Is anyone out there?" Silence. "Please, help me!" And then, over the clatter of the flying Venetian blinds and the mad croaking of the frogs, she heard a disgusting crack, so dry, the sound of cracking bones, and, looking to the front of the room, Corky saw one bony hand break off the skeleton. She watched, frozen in horror, as the hand, its fingers coiling and uncoiling as if limbering up, floated up over the countertops. The now handless skeleton continued to strain against its stand, attempting to free itself. The bony hand flew toward Corky as if shot from a gun. Corky tried to cry out, tried to duck, but the hand zoomed in on her, flew over the wildly hopping frogs, over the quivering eyeball, through the curtain of dead insects that choked the air. The hand slammed into her, grabbed her by the throat. The force of the collision sent her sprawling against the door. "Help me! Somebody!" she shrieked in a voice she no longer recognized. And then the fingers tightened around her throat. The cold, bony hand squeezed tighter, 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 until she could no longer breathe. Chapter 13. Corky noisily tried to suck in a deep breath, but the bony fingers dug farther into her throat, tightening their already steely grip. The room pulsed with noise. The clanking of the fluttering blinds competed with the frantic croaking of the frogs. The light brightened again, then dimmed, then stayed dim as the hand choked off the last of Corky's air. She whirled around and tried to slam the hand against the wall. Then she reached up with both hands and grabbed the hand at the wrist. It felt so cold, cold and damp, as if it had just risen from a wet grave. The room spun. The dark ceiling appeared to lower on her. Corky grabbed the wrist with both hands and tugged. The bony fingers dug deeper into her throat, squeezing tighter. She reached for the fingers, grabbed two in each hand, and pulled with all her might. The sickening sound of bones cracking gave Corky some hope. Suddenly, she could breathe. She noisily sucked in air, exhaled, sucked in more. The broken fingers grasped frantically for her, but their hold was weak. She grabbed the cold wrist, pulled the broken hand off, and heaved it across the room. Then, with a cry of horror, of disbelief, of relief, all mixed in one, Corky lurched for the doorknob again and frantically turned it. This time, the door opened. She found herself in the dark, silent corridor. She slammed the lab door hard behind her. Her heart pounded, the only sound now. Her eyes were clouded by tears. She pushed her hair back from her face and started to run. "Chip," she said out loud. "Chip!" He had told her he'd be working late in the wood shop. They had made plans to meet there after her exam. "Chip!" Off balance, the floor tilting ahead of her, Corky started to run down the long hallway, her footsteps echoing loudly. She was breathing noisily through her open mouth. "Chip!" She rubbed her throbbing throat as she ran. The bony fingers were gone, but she could still feel them pressing against it, so cold and wet, until she couldn't breathe. "Chip!" The shop was downstairs at the back of the building. She stumbled on the first step but thrust out both hands and caught herself on the railing. Isn't anyone here? She wondered. The vast school building was so silent that she imagined she could hear her thoughts echoing in the hall. Down the stairs and along a shorter hallway, the double doors to the shop came into view. The silence gave way to a high-pitched roar, a steady whine. What is that noise? Corky wondered. She pushed her way through the double doors, bumping them open with her body, and lunged into the shop. "Chip, where are you?" she cried, her voice revealing her terror. "Chip!" The steady roar grew louder, closer. Her eyes darted over to the work tables, the pile of lumber against the side wall, the tall power drills, the safety goggles hanging on their pegs. "Chip, where are you? Are you here?" She made her way into the center of the big room, her sneakers sliding over the fragrant sawdust on the floor. She came to a halt at the dark puddle. "What is that?" She stared down at it. It took her a long time to realize she was staring at a puddle of blood. Then she saw 2 shoes on the floor, legs almost hidden behind a work table. Taking a deep breath, she made her way around the dark puddle to get a better view. She cried out when she saw Chip lying face down in a larger puddle of blood, a lake of dark blood. "Oh!" She grabbed the top of the work table, leaned against it, forced herself not to drop down beside him. "Chip!" She could tell that he was dead. Chip was dead, sprawled there in his own blood. She had to look away. She couldn't keep on staring at him. She glanced up and saw the power saw, and realized the steady whirring sound came from the power saw. The blade was spinning loudly, louder, even louder, and then Corky's ear-piercing screams drowned out the roar of the whirring saw blade as she caught sight of Chip's severed hand. Chip's hand, cut off at the wrist, rested like a glove beside the blade. Chapter 14. Corky didn't cry at Chip's funeral. She was all cried out. She had cried until her eyes burned and her cheeks were red and swollen, and then suddenly her tears were gone, as if she'd used up her lifetime supply. She was hollow now, drained of all emotion, except for the sadness. The sadness remained, and behind it lurked the terror, the frightening memories, the terrifying scenes that she knew would remain forever in her mind. The thoughts followed her everywhere she went, kept her wide awake at night. Something was wrong in the world. Something was there, in her life. Something evil, something inhuman, something out of control. After the funeral, she walked by herself from the small chapel, out into a gray, blustery day. A circle of swirling brown leaves danced over her shoes as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Dead leaves, death, everywhere. Corky turned up the collar of her coat, more to hide her face than to protect herself from the gusting winds. She jammed her frozen hands deep into her coat pockets and started to walk. "Hey, Corky!" Kimmy came jogging up to her, her black crimped hair bobbing, her cheeks bright red, her dark eyes watery and red-rimmed. Without saying a word, Kimmy threw her arms around Corky's shoulders and hugged her, pressing her warm cheek against Corky's cold face. After a few seconds, Kimmy stepped backward awkwardly, shaking her head. "It's so awful," she whispered. She squeezed the arm of Corky's coat. "And you found him. You were the one who—" Her voice caught in her throat. "I'm so sorry, Corky." Corky lowered her eyes to the pavement. More brown leaves scrabbled over her shoes, tossed by the wind. Ronnie and Heather appeared, their faces pale, their expressions grim. Kimmy hugged them both. They offered low-voiced greetings to Corky. Then the 3 girls headed off toward Kimmy's blue Camry, parked across the street. "Call me," Kimmy called to Corky. "Okay?" She didn't wait for a reply. Corky watched them climb into Kimmy's car. She saw all 3 of them talking at once inside the car. As they talked, they kept stealing glances at Corky. Corky turned away and started to walk. She had gone several steps before she realized she wasn't alone. "Hi, Corky," Deborah said. Her cold, blue eyes peered out at Corky from under the hood of the black cape she had taken to wearing. Deborah always was pale and fragile, but today she appeared almost ghost-like. "Come talk to me," she said, her voice barely rising over the rush of the wind. Corky shook her head. "I really don't feel like talking." She started to walk again. Deborah hurried to keep up with her. The wind blew back her hood, revealing her short blonde hair. "We have to talk, Corky. We have to," she insisted. "But, Deborah—" "Over there?" Deborah grabbed Corky's arm and pointed toward a small diner across the street. "Just for a few minutes. We'll grab a hamburger or something to drink. I'll buy, okay?" Deborah was pleading so hard that Corky felt she had no choice. "Okay," she said, sighing. "Actually, I haven't eaten today." A pleased smile crossed Deborah's face as she grabbed Corky's arm and pulled her across the street. A few minutes later, they were seated in a tiny booth, their coats folded beside them. Deborah was eating a bacon cheeseburger and french fries. Corky, realizing she wasn't as hungry as she thought, took a few spoonfuls from a bowl of vegetable soup. "People say such dumb things at funerals," Deborah said, wiping ketchup off her chin with a napkin. "I heard someone tell Chip's mom that it was a really good funeral." She shook her head. "Now, what's that supposed to mean?" Corky stared down at the soup. "I don't know. I think people feel so uncomfortable at funerals, they don't know what they're saying," she told Deborah. "People said some pretty weird things to me at Bobby's funeral." Bobby's funeral. Chip's funeral. There had been so many funerals in her life recently. She forced down a few more spoonfuls of soup. It didn't taste great, but the warm liquid was soothing on her throat. We have to talk about the evil spirit, Deborah said suddenly, lowering her voice even though they were the only customers in the diner. Corky sighed. Yeah, I know. She stirred her soup, but she couldn't eat any more. You and I both know that the evil spirit killed Chip, Deborah said heatedly. He didn't accidentally cut off his hand and stand there bleeding to death without calling for help or anything. The doctor said he probably sawed his hand off and then went into shock, Corky said. Do you believe that? Deborah demanded. Corky hesitated, then shook her head. No. For one thing, Chip was such a careful guy, he wouldn't stand there and slice off his entire hand. I know, Corky said, her voice catching in her throat. Also, do you know how hard it would be to slice your hand clean off? If you just nicked your wrist, you'd pull it away immediately. You wouldn't keep right on sawing, she exclaimed. Deborah, please. Corky turned her eyes to the front of the diner. Through the window, she could see that wet flakes of snow had started to fall. The evil is still alive, Corky, Deborah continued. I know it, Kimmy knows it, and you know it. We can't just ignore it. We can't pretend it isn't there and hope it'll go away and everything will be nice again. I know, Corky wailed. I know better than anyone, Deborah. Deborah reached across the tabletop and squeezed Corky's hand. Sorry, I just meant... The evil revealed itself to me, Corky told her, just before I found Chip. Deborah lowered her cheeseburger to the plate. She stared at Corky as if trying to read her mind. What do you mean? Corky took a deep breath and told her everything that had happened in the science lab, starting with the door slamming shut and the lights going out, ending with her desperate struggle with the skeleton's hand. Deborah listened in silence, resting her chin in her hands. Both girls ignored their food while Corky told her frightening story. I don't believe it, Deborah said softly. I don't believe it. There's more, Corky said softly, raising her eyes to the window in front. The snow was turning to a bleak wet drizzle. Go on, Deborah urged. Please. Corky told her about her encounters with John Daly and Sarah Beth Plummer. Then she told about driving past the Fear Street Cemetery, about seeing Sarah Beth and John in the cemetery together. What were they doing? Deborah asked, removing her chin from her hands and sitting up straight. I don't know, Corky told her. It was so strange. I saw Sarah Beth perform a dance on Sarah Fear's grave. You mean while John was watching? Deborah asked. John leaned on the gravestone and watched, Corky said. It was so creepy. The evil spirit is definitely alive, Deborah said in a whisper. But where? Corky asked. Why didn't it stay down in the grave? Where is it? I think I know how to find it, Deborah said mysteriously. Chapter 15. We've got razzmatazz, pep punch and pizzazz. Hey you've been had. Shady Side Tigers got razzmatazz, razzmatazz. As they repeated razzmatazz, the 5 cheerleaders performed flying splits. Then they landed on their feet and, with a whooping cheer, ran to the sidelines clapping. Wow, that was awesome, Corky cried, pushing up the sleeves of her tiger sweatshirt as she moved toward them. How about the flying splits? Kimmy asked, her expression concerned. High enough? I had the feeling Megan and I were a little late. Looked excellent to me, Corky said, grinning. Don't be so hard on yourselves. Yeah, Ronnie piped up. If Corky says it was awesome, it was awesome. Everyone laughed. Kimmy has really improved, Corky thought happily. She's much more graceful. She's even lost some weight. It was nearly 4 weeks after Chip's funeral, and Kimmy had persuaded Corky to come to cheerleading practice once again. We all have to stick together, Kimmy had urged Corky. If we're going to find the evil, if you're going to fight it, we have to work together. If you're not on the squad, you're not really with us. You're alone. Kimmy's words had touched Corky, had convinced her. Now here she was, ready to give it another try. The girls, dressed in tights, denim cutoffs, and oversized t-shirts, seemed relaxed and enthusiastic, and glad to see Corky again. You ready to try the routine now? Kimmy asked Corky. Corky didn't hesitate. Yeah, I'm ready. This time, she wasn't going to be stopped. She knew that next Saturday night was one of the last basketball games of the season. If she was going to get back on the squad, it was now or never. Corky glanced across the brightly lit gym. Standing against the wall beside her office, Miss Green flashed her a thumbs-up sign. Corky returned the signal and stepped into line next to Kimmy. You have to help me with the hand claps, she said. I think I'm straight on everything else. I never get them right either, Kimmy joked, giving Corky an encouraging smile. Waiting for Kimmy to begin the cheer, Corky felt a moment of panic. The bright gym seems to fade behind a curtain of white light. Silence seems to encircle her. I'm all alone, she thought. all by myself out here. But then the cheer began, the white light dimmed, and the rest of the world returned. We've got razzmatazz, pep punch and pizzazz. Hey you've been had. Shady Side Tiger's got razzmatazz. Shouting at the top of her lungs, Corky moved easily through the routine, and when it came to the finale of flying splits, she timed her jump perfectly and leapt higher and cleaner than any of the other girls. The routine ended with a whooping cheer, and the girls jogged to the sidelines clapping. Corky took a deep breath and realized she was laughing from sheer joy, from the happiness of being able to perform an entire routine. Before she realized what was happening, she was surrounded by the others. They were laughing too, eager to congratulate her, to compliment her on her performance, to welcome her back. Now that you're back, we can do the diamond head pyramid again, Kimmy exclaimed. You know, the one your sister invented? Yeah, let's try it, Corky said with enthusiasm. Now? Kimmy asked, expressing her surprise. Yeah, right now, Corky insisted, smiling. If we're going to do the pyramid Saturday night at the game, we'd better start now. You'll have to run us through it, Kimmy said uncertainly. Corky saw Deborah and Ronnie whispering intensely near the wall. No problem, Corky said, signaling everyone to follow her to the center of the floor. Bobby and I spent so much time on this routine, I think I could do it in my sleep. Who's going to take the top? Ronnie asked, stretching her legs. I will, Corky told her. She saw the doubt form on Kimmy's face. Corky, Kimmy whispered confidentially, leaning close. Are you sure? Don't you want to take it easy? No. Corky shook her head emphatically and stepped back from Kimmy. Either I'm going to be back on the squad just like before, or I'm not, she insisted. Kimmy quickly relented. Maybe we should warm up a bit first, Deborah suggested. You know, do some roll-ups into partner pyramids before we try the big pyramid? She cast Corky a pleading look. We're already warmed up, Corky replied. Corky's right, Kimmy told Deborah. Let's just do it, guys. Corky quickly outlined the pyramid to them. 3 girls, Kimmy, Deborah, and Heather, formed the bottom tier. 2 girls, Megan and Ronnie, would stand on their shoulders, then move into liberties, each girl raising her outside foot and holding it up as Corky mounted to the top to stand on Megan's and Ronnie's shoulders. They all worked on shoulder mounts and dismounts for a few minutes. Then Corky guided them into position for the pyramid. I wish Bobby were here, she found herself thinking. She was the real expert at getting this going. But then she pushed Bobby from her mind, shaking her head hard as if shaking her thoughts away. Ready? She called. Let's try it now. Take it slowly. Don't worry about the timing. Heather, bend your knees, Kimmy instructed, as Megan and Ronnie performed their shoulder mounts to form the middle tier. Before she realized it, it was Corky's turn to move. Before she realized it, she was climbing into position, off the floor, climbing so high. And even with all of her concentration, the thoughts came rushing back, the fears, the memories, the questions. Will I start to hear the screaming girl again? Will I freeze up at the top? Will the room start to spin or go crazy? Megan and Ronnie each grabbed one of Corky's hands and tugged. Corky stepped off Kimmy's shoulders and climbed. Higher. Uh-oh, she thought. Now is when the trouble comes. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. She held her breath. Her temples throbbed. She could feel the panic well up, could feel it deaden her legs, could feel the fear rise up from her stomach, tighten her throat. She could feel it pulse at her temples, hear it ring in her ears. Uh-oh. Now is when the trouble comes. Now, now, now. She stiffened her knees and raised her hands high. Balance. Balance. She concentrated all of her will. Uh-oh. Now. Now. And there she was, on top of the pyramid. Shaky, but there. No voices, no spinning walls, no shrieks of terror. No evil. Congratulations, Corky heard a voice call from the floor. Excellent. She peered down to see Miss Green applauding, a broad smile on her usually dour face. Now watch the dismount. Take it slow, okay? A few seconds later, the girls were on the floor, congratulating one another enthusiastically. Even Miss Green joined in the celebration. We did it, and no broken bones, Corky exclaimed. To Corky's surprise, Kimmy threw her arms around her and smothered her in a warm hug. I knew you could do it, Kimmy gushed, and then, in a whisper, she added in her ear, Maybe the evil has left us. Maybe the nightmare is finally over. Carry these for me, Deborah said, handing the bundle of slender red candles to Kimmy. Deborah wrapped her black cloak tighter around her neck. The full moon rose over the trees. The wind sent dry leaves scampering over the weeds and tall grass. Behind them on the street, a car rolled silently by, only one headlamp lighting its way. I can't believe you talked me into this, Kimmy said grumpily. This is so stupid. We'll go back to my house afterward, Corky offered. We can order pizza. Stop complaining. The weather's not so bad, Deborah said, leading the way up the hill. The dead grass clung to their boots. Somewhere in the distance, the wind toppled a garbage can. The lid clattered noisily. A cat wailed, sounding human, like a baby. The three girls stopped at the front walk, the concrete broken and crumbling. They stared up at the ruins of the old mansion. Wow, Corky whispered. I've never been this close. The stone walls of the mansion were charred black, evidence of the fire that had destroyed it decades before. All of the windows had been blown out. Only the front one was boarded up with a large sheet of plywood. The rest were gaping holes, revealing darkness behind the crumbling walls. Hey, look! Kimmy bent down and picked up something from the dead grass beside the broken walk. Corky shone a flashlight on it. It was a doll, wide-eyed and bald, one arm missing. It looks old, Deborah said, examining it closely. Kimmy dropped it to the ground. What are we doing here? She repeated. Look at the stump. I know what I'm doing, Deborah replied mysteriously. She gripped a large black-covered book in her hand, gesturing with it toward the door. Let's go inside? I don't think so, Kimmy said unhappily, her eyes surveying the burned walls. Come on, Corky said, tugging at Kimmy's arm. It's worth a try. I know what I'm doing, Deborah repeated seriously. Visiting the Simon Fear mansion makes perfect sense to me. None of this makes perfect sense, Kimmy grumbled, shifting the candles to her other hand. How can going into this burnt-out old wreck in the coldest night of the year make any sense? Do you want to locate the evil spirit, or don't you? Deborah snapped, losing her patience for the first time. We do, Corky answered quickly. What makes you think we're going to find it here? Kimmy demanded. She kicked the old doll away. It bounced across the walk and lay sprawled face down in the grass. Sarah Fear spent a lot of time in this house, Deborah explained. If the evil spirit is hers, this is the most logical place for it to hang out. Logical, Kimmy muttered sarcastically. You're being a bad sport, Corky scolded. This is better than studying for the history exam, isn't it? Deborah focused on Corky, a hurt expression on her face, which was shrouded in the black hood of her cape. You don't believe me either? You're not taking this seriously? I take the evil spirit very seriously, Corky told her in a low, somber voice. I want to know where it is. That's why I agreed to come with you. I take it seriously too, Kimmy insisted. But I don't think we're going to get anywhere poking around and lighting a bunch of candles in this burned-out old mansion. Well, we have to do something, Corky cried heatedly. Maybe Deborah's idea is dumb, and maybe it isn't. Let's face it, Kimmy, we're desperate. We've got to act. We can't just sit around and wait to see which one of us it kills next. Corky's speech appeared to affect Kimmy. You're right, she said softly, and her expression turned thoughtful as she followed the other two toward the house. I've been reading a lot, Deborah said, making her way through the tall weeds to the front door, holding the book in front of her, pressing it against her chest as if for protection. This old book tells how to raise a spirit? This house is the place to raise Sarah Fear's spirit? She tugged at the old wooden door, and it suddenly pulled open easily. A damp, sour smell invaded their nostrils. I can't go in there. Really? Kimmy insisted, taking a few steps back, her features twisted in disgust. Here, I'll give you the flashlight, Corky offered. Trade you for the candles? Having the flashlight won't help, Kimmy replied, staring into the darkness behind the open front door. Don't you know the stories about this place? This whole house is evil. The spirits are alive here, Deborah said, her eyes glowing in the beam of the flashlight. I can feel them. I know we're going to succeed. Corky followed her into the house. Kimmy, her hand on Corky's shoulder, reluctantly entered too. Yuck! It smells in here, she complained. You'll get used to it, Deborah said quietly. She led them through the wide entryway that opened into a large sitting room. Corky shone the flashlight around the room. Wallpaper curled down from the walls, streaked with black. Dark stains covered the ceiling, which bulged and drooped. The floorboards were cracked and broken. Watch your step, Corky warned. Look, there are holes in the floor. The air felt heavy and wet. The smell of mildew and decay surrounded them. The rotting floorboards creaked as the girls made their way to the center of the room. This is great, Deborah exclaimed, taking a deep sniff of the sour air, her eyes glowing with excitement. I can feel the evil spirit, I really can. I can smell it, Kimmy said sarcastically. Hand me the candles, Deborah said. She placed the book on the floor and took the candles from Kimmy. Shine the light down on the book, okay? I've got to find the right page, Deborah instructed as she flipped through the pages. Corky felt a cold chill run down her back. It just feels so evil in here, she said, surveying the fire-stained walls, the broken floorboards. We each take a candle, Deborah instructed. She handed Corky and Kimmy each a red one, then lighted all three. We kneel in the center of the room, she said, lowering her voice to a whisper. Corky and Kimmy obediently knelt beside Deborah. Hold the candle in your left hand, Deborah instructed. Then we put our right hands forward and clasp them in the center. The girls followed these directions. Suddenly, the flames dipped low and nearly went out. Corky gasped and let go of Kimmy's hand. You felt it too? Deborah asked, excited. You felt the spirit? It was just the wind, Kimmy said, rolling her eyes. Give us a break. Try to concentrate, Kimmy, Deborah scolded. We need total concentration. I can locate the spirit here, I know I can, but we have to concentrate. I'm concentrating, Kimmy muttered. They held hands again. The candle flames dipped once more. This time, none of the girls reacted. I'm going to chant now, Deborah told them. When I finish the chant, the book says we should know where the evil spirit is. Corky swallowed hard. The rotting floorboards creaked. The candle flames dipped, then stood tall again. This is going to work, Corky thought. The spirit of Sarah Fear has to be somewhere in this frightening old place. Give it the old razzmatazz, Kimmy told Deborah. Deborah glared at Kimmy. Shh. She raised a finger to her lips and held it there. Then, closing her eyes, she wrapped both hands around her candle and began to chant. The flickering light played over her pale, pretty face under the black hood. She chanted in a language Corky didn't recognize. At first her voice was soft, but it grew louder and stronger as she continued to chant. Her eyes still closed, Deborah began to move the candle in a circle in front of her, still gripping it with both hands, around and around, slowly, slowly, while chanting louder and louder. Gripping the candle in her left hand and Kimmy's hand in her right, Corky stared straight ahead, concentrating on Deborah's strange musical words. After a few minutes, Deborah finished her chant. She opened her eyes, and all three girls cried out as the evil spirit rose from a hole in the rotting floor.